Greetings, friends, and welcome to this podcast today. I'm Conrad, Kanagy, your host, and I'm delighted to have with me John Yoder, who has written a book or is writing a book. He's actually written a book and is writing a book. So, John, welcome to the show. John is retired at this point, but not really retired. He's actively writing. And so, John, what is the name of the book? Say a little more about yourself, introduce yourself, but what is the name of the book we're working with today?
Thanks, Connor. Great to be here, and thanks for inviting me. Um, yeah, I grew up in an Amish community many years ago, actually. And so I've spent a good bit of time now since I've retired from a career as a professor, an academic dean, as a provost in various universities, um, Africa, as well as United States. But since retirement, I've found myself interested and quite fascinated by sort of going back into not only my own life, and that's the focus of the memoir, of course, that I'm working on, but prior to that, the uh, background, the what I call the social and cultural DNA that I inherited from my not only my parents but also my ancestors going way back. It's maybe some kind of a collective memory. I think that carries forward. Who knows from where? But the book you're talking about, or we're talking about, actually, is called "Fragments of a Life," and then there's a long subtitle. I've got to read it myself just to be sure I get it right. A speculative but plausible semi-narrative of Christian Nisly, 1804, immigrant to America.
So,
Christian Nisly,
John,
sorry, go
I've
ahead.
read this. I've read this book, and it flows quite well. It reads quite well. There's a kind of universal quality to it, but the title is a little awkward. Doesn't slip off the tongue easily. Can you tell us about the title and the origins?
Yes, and that kind of gets into the story itself, actually. Um, Christian Nisly is my great great grandfather. He immigrated to the U.S. in the early part of the 19th century, 1804. Uh, and growing up in our family histories, individuals who would write genealogical accounts of the family, all of that, always made reference to Christian Nisly, the immigrant. Um, but as I began becoming familiar with that, it was interesting that his life just had lots and lots of holes in it. There was so much about him prior to his immigration that we don't know, didn't know anything about. And so my attempt in pulling together this book, and I spent probably 3 or 4 years working on it actually, uh, was an attempt to try to piece together some of those missing parts. And I wasn't successful. It was like a jigsaw puzzle with lots of pieces left out. So I called it Fragments. And from those fragments, I've kind of tried to create. It's not. It's a speculative number of fragments in many places, but it's plausible. At least in my opinion, it is. And so I kind of tried to weave that together into some sort of a framework, and that's why I call it a semi-narrative. So all the words in the title are explained, but maybe it's not the greatest title.
John, what intrigues me about this book is that I've read a lot of history, and this, and I think there are stereotypes sometimes we have or characterizations of history and the way it's written, but this really is a story, and you captured the story of his life. And I wonder if even the idea that it's speculative but plausible gave you a freedom to write that tapped into the creativity that you have as a writer. I don't know, but it reads like a story.
Yeah, I think you may be onto something there, Conrad. I think that's probably true. But I did, as I was writing, I really did personally get into the story in a way that I hadn't really expected to. The book actually begins uh, with the origins of the name back in the early 1600s, just kind of northeast of Zurich, Switzerland. Um, and for as long as I can remember, there's always been kind of conversation within the larger Nisly family, which, by the way, is a derivation or a form of Nisly. So the Nislys and the Nisleys probably come from the same original name. But there's all sorts of sort of wild tales about where the name came from. And the most plausible, again, this is a plausible but speculative name, is to place the name, as I said, in Zurich, near Zurich, about 20 miles from Zurich, Switzerland. There is a hill still there today in a town, a small village called Nussbaum. Not Nussbaum. Um, now I'm not even remembering it. Anyway, it has the word Nuss in it, which in German, of course, is nut. And it was common then, back in those days, to refer to people by where they came from. So someone from Nussberg, I'm sorry, that's the word I was looking for, Nut Mountain, actually, Nussberg. So folks who came from around Nussberg would be from Nussberg, they would be Nussleaves. Because they're from the Nuss. So I think the argument, I picked this up from somewhere else, it's not my original argument, but I think it's a plausible one to say that, yeah, so people who grew up around Nussberg are Nusslees. And of course, eventually that becomes Nisly, it becomes Nisly, it becomes all the other forms of the word that one has. So I pick it up there. And there's actually an individual that another historian has found, and so I'm piggybacking on her work. Her work was published in the journal Mennonite Family History maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So I track him or the family after the 30 Years' War into northern Germany. Switzerland was not so badly impacted by the 30 Years' War as the rest of Europe, but the unemployment in Switzerland was really very high. And so it was quite common for folks with skills to migrate into the devastated parts of Europe after the 30 Years' War and live there and not only escape the religious persecution in Switzerland, which was very real, but also the economic hard times. And so we're able to trace the Nisly name into the Palatinate in Germany. And then it appears that in about 1700, well, in the 1700s, a group of that family migrated to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and they are today Nisleys, and they are still there. But there's one member of that family, it's believed anyway, that did not migrate. He was recorded in the Palatinate as having gotten married, but his wife died the first year of their marriage. And the same year, his father also died. And at that point, this individual's name disappears. We have no idea, as far as the record is concerned, where whether he was still living or not. So that's when it became intriguing. And it sort of felt to me like trying to put the pieces together in a detective mystery story. And so, long story short, I kind of tracked him down, or at least potentially, speculatively, to northern Germany, and then his emigration from northern Germany to America, which is in contrast to what the family lore has believed. They had him leaving Europe from Rotterdam, and they had him leaving Europe as a 16 or 17-year-old lad. Well, I've searched the ship's records for 1804 coming into Philadelphia, and there's no name that's even close. But there is this name, not quite the same name, but as you would know, they do lots of spelling changes when immigrants came to the ship and the names were recorded. So I found him. I think I found him coming from northern Germany, and not 16 or 17 years old, but at least according to the ship's record, he was 30 years old. And so that changes the story completely. in terms of how you imagine that. Uh, Again, long story short, he ended up being he came as a uh, uh, had work to pay for his passage. He was uh, I'm not thinking of the right word that I want right now, but he worked for an Amish farmer in just outside of Philadelphia for about 3 years. Got married to an Amish woman in Western Pennsylvania, and so we of course have that history a bit. And the book ends with him having moved from Western Pennsylvania to Holmes County, Ohio, near Walnut Creek, and the farm that he bought, we know where that is. And on that farm, there's an old, very, very old graveyard on the top of a hill overlooking the creek below. And we're pretty sure that's where he and his wife are buried.
But the burial record, you don't know the site for sure.
No, we don't even know. He died somewhere in the mid 1800s. But there's no, as far as I can find out, and I've done that research, there's no official record of his death. But
So John, some of those who come from the Amish community, Amish tradition, I mean, the story is very well known of immigrants, or it's maybe not as speculative or plausible. What was it that why do you think the story had so many gaps in it or holes in it?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because it reminds me, one of the things that happened uh, with regularity in the amateur written histories within our family, individuals who are writing genealogies, was reference to a diary or a day book that Christian the immigrant was supposed to have kept. Um, and so any number of these amateur historians, genealogists, would make reference to the diary. But as far as I could find out, none of them had ever seen the actual diary. They were quoting from each other. And I've again tried to, I think I know now what happened to the diary. It was given to one of his descendants, of course, and ended up in Michigan, I believe. And as best I can find out from the family who must have had it, the diary was apparently eaten by termites. So we have no actual written record beyond the speculation that I've come up with regard to the ship's passage and so on. Of course, his record after getting to the States, that's pretty clear. We have that it's at least less speculative than the pre-Philadelphia part.
So John, I noticed in the book there's a lot about place and location. Can you tell me why you think place and location matter in the life of someone or in the life of a family?
I think they do matter, Conrad. Thanks for asking that as well. And now we're kind of moving into maybe something that's speculative, but I think plausible as well, is that we are actually shaped by the landscape. We're shaped by the place that we inhabit, a place says in many cases. And I think those traces, those shapings stick with us no one knows how long. But just like the biological DNA, I'm convinced personally that there are traces of those stampings, if you will, that stick with us for a very long time. I don't know whether I'm still influenced by the mountains and hills of Switzerland. My grandparents, ancestors on my paternal side also were Swiss. And I'm about, I guess, 100% Swiss. I'm not sure. But I do know something that I can't explain. But I have been back to Switzerland now numerous times. And maybe it's all in my head, but somehow when I land there and I see the people around me, there's a kind of feeling of belonging that I can't explain. As I said, maybe it's all in my head, but maybe there's something that's deeper than that.
So, John, if that's true, if our biography matters and the biological DNA and the location matters, why are stories like this important to tell and to kind of rediscover?
I think it's important. Well, first of all, I this little book I enjoyed just because it was fun to do. It was like a mystery, like trying to unravel a mystery. But I think they give us Conrad, I think they give us a sense of rootedness that I believe is really kind of important. Gives me and others in their own way a sense of belonging somewhere. And that is just really important in today's world, especially.
Yeah, and I think of my students, John, who I teach 18 to 21-year-olds, and the sense of rootedness and groundedness is almost absent. Their ability to or capacity to define a community from which they come is almost impossible. And so, but I have them do a biography of an ancestor, and it's amazing to me how they resonate, connect with that. And there's something about the groundedness of the story of their family that is really, really important to them. And they cry and they laugh and they smile. And they come to life in some new ways.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense to me.
John, your this book is available on Amazon. It's available as paperback and now available as Kindle. Is there anything you want to say about accessing the book?
Only to say, to repeat what you just said, and no particular reason to repeat it. It is available from Moscow Press. I don't have their address in front of me, but it's on Amazon as well. Be warned, there are many John Yoders on Amazon Books, and so you'll have to kind of be sure you find the right John Yoder in this case if you're looking for it there. Similarly, I discovered there are several books that have, for the beginning title at least, that have the Fragments of a Life. So you'll have to put the title and my name together, but it's there. And just recently then, I think coming out as a Kindle edition as well.
And so, John, can you give us the title one more time?
Yes, it's called, and I'll hold up the book. It looks like this. Fragments of a Life, a speculative but plausible semi-narrative of Christian Nisly, 1804 immigrant to America.
And I just would say to the audience, this book is well worth reading. It has a universality to it. It's the story of all of us in some ways, where we are looking for, as John was, the fragments, the pieces that ground us. But also, one of the quotes that I like to tell my students, John, it comes from Peter Berger, that we are dropped into a constructed world that was created by people now long dead. And Christian Nisly was now long dead, but he created a world that you're a product of, and your family's a product of. So thank you for being with us today. We'll have you back in the future because you're writing another book, a second book. You want to say anything about that, John?
Only to say that's looking more at myself. And I think I may have mentioned that I grew up in an Amish community, and it's not Amish, if you will, to talk about yourself. But the book that I'm working on now, with Conrad, by the way, Conrad is being a great resource, is a memoir that takes me from actually my beginnings to the beginnings of my ancestors in the Midwest, Oklahoma, Kansas, Dust Bowl, all of that, through to Virginia, and then eventually to where I am now as I guess, retired academic.
And I would just say a couple of things about John's writing. There is a kind of universal quality to it. It's a story of all of us in some ways. You cite Frederick Buechner, one of my favorite authors, and he puts his own story in a similar kind of context as you do. That it just might be that in reading your story or his story, we find our own story in some new ways. So I look forward to that being out, and we'll have you back to talk about that, John. Thanks for being with us, and it's great to have you as a guest.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.